Okay, so this is just a quick comparison of the code completion with GitHub Copilot versus a small locally running model that's been fine-tuned to the codebase. The codebase I have with me today is Pebble OS, which was recently open sourced by Google, and I have it open here in VS Code on the left. And as you can see, I have deleted some portions of the code. I've removed some methods, and on the right, you can see the actual expected implementation of those methods. So let's see how GitHub Copilot performs in this situation. We'll try to get it to implement some of these methods. Um, okay, so this is the completion that Copilot gives me, and it seems okay, but there are some issues with the generated code. As you can see, if you compare it with what's expected, the function parameters are incorrect. It's missed the history length parameter, and the types are wrong. And it's also hallucinated one of the possible values of this metric variable, right? So it seems okay on first glance, but you have these mistakes. So let's fix that. Right. So let's move on. Let's try this helper. Let's try implementing this helper function here. And if you compare it with the ground truth, again, the arguments are all wrong. The construction of it's not initialized the correct variable. So let's try and fix that. Okay, so now it is giving me what I need. Now let's try calling RTC set time. Uh, Here it doesn't realize that RTC set time only takes a single parameter, and it tries to pass in all three variables, the day, hour, and minute, which is wrong. So let's try to help it here. We'll call this. Okay, so this looks good. Um, So let's move on to implementing a test. So let's try to implement this test here, the one that checks whether the alarm triggers after 30 minutes. Okay, so this is what Copilot is telling me, which is not at all what we want. We want to first create an alarm. So let's do that. Okay, so this is what Copilot thinks we need to do in order to create an alarm, which does not match what is expected. So let's fix that. Again, it does not know what it needs to pass to create an alarm. Uh, right. So as you can see, the experience is not that great. Copilot frequently makes mistakes uh, in determining function arguments, and it doesn't know the types that well. Possibly because I don't have those files open right now. If I did, it would probably be part of the context that's sent in the prompts. So now let's switch over to our fine-tune model and see how that performs. I will first disable Copilot, and I'm going to use continue.dev to connect to my locally running model. In fact, I'll just quit VS Code and start again. I'll also need to reset all the changes I've made. Right. So we're back in VS Code. Let's go back to the function that we were editing. Yeah. So now I'm going to be receiving tab complete suggestions from continue instead of Copilot. And I've already configured my continue assistant to point to the 7 billion parameter model, which is running locally on my home server. And this is the model that's going to be serving us tab completions right now. So let's go ahead and see how this model does. Okay, so right off the bat, it's given me a way better suggestion. It knows that we need a history length parameter, and it made a mistake in using an unsigned integer instead of a signed 32-bit integer, which is fine. But let's fix that, and let's see how it does the rest of the method. Okay, yes, yes, great, right. It made a mistake here, didn't close the, yeah, right. So already you can see this is a way much better completion than before. It's missed a few things, like it hasn't failed the test, so we need to fail the test if we reach here. So let's do that. Right. So let's move on to the next method, which is the set time function. Let's try to implement that. Here it suggests something which is not quite right. So let's help it a bit. Okay, great. Um, yeah. So it's attempting to create a struct, which is not what we want. So let's help it a bit. Okay. So now let's try to call RTC set time. So if we do this right, it knows that it needs to pass a single argument. So it's got that over Copilot, but it's incorrectly assuming the existence of a time struct. So let's fix that. Right. Okay, so let's move on to actually implement one of the tests and see how it performs here. I'm going to rewrite this. Yeah, so now we need to create an alarm. Let's do that. So yeah, as you can see here, it knows that it needs to call alarm create in order to create an alarm, and it also creates one correctly. If you compare it with the expected implementation here, it knows that it needs to call alarm create with an alarm info struct, and it also initializes all members of the struct correctly, which is remarkable for a 7 billion parameter model. Um, so let's continue maybe a bit more. Let's see if it can assert alarm config. Yes, this is what I want. And let's see if it's able to assert equal. It knows that we need to check the number of timeline adds. It knows that we need to check the number of timeline removes. Here the suggestions are not quite right, so let's help it out a bit. Activity, sleep, awake. It knows that we need to select set sleep. Okay, so to initialize, so it knows that in order to initialize the next alarm time, it needs to call alarm get next enabled alarm, which is great. And it also, let's try to do the assert. Great. Okay, so hopefully you can see that the experience with the fine-tuned model was just as good, if not better, than the Copilot one. Frankly, I preferred coding with the fine-tuned model. Um, so yeah, so this serves as a useful demonstration of the fact that fine-tuned models can be really useful code completion assistants, and you can get one for quite cheap as well, and it's cheap to deploy and cheap to train. So thank you.